The storm arrived before dusk, rolling across the English countryside like a dark army advancing toward battle. Wind lashed the ancient stone walls of Blackthorn Castle, rattling stained-glass windows that had witnessed generations of dukes, duchesses, weddings, funerals, and betrayals. Rain hammered against the towers without mercy, turning the gardens below into pools of silver darkness. Inside, chandeliers blazed with golden light, yet no warmth could soften the chill gathering in the grand hall. Dozens of guests stood beneath painted ceilings and towering marble columns. Aristocrats whispered behind jeweled fans. Servants lingered at the edges of the room, pretending to polish silver trays while listening to every word. Rumors had spread through London for weeks, crossing drawing rooms and ballrooms with alarming speed. Every gaze in the hall carried the same poisonous question. Had the Duchess betrayed her husband? At the center of that silent judgment stood Lady Eleanor Blackthorn. She was 26 years old and heavily pregnant, her rounded belly visible beneath a sapphire gown that no longer concealed the life she carried. Exhaustion shadowed her features, but her posture remained graceful. Her hands trembled slightly, yet her chin stayed lifted. She knew what people were saying. She had heard every whisper, every cruel glance, every calculated silence. Across the hall stood her husband, Duke Alexander Blackthorn. Tall, commanding, and feared throughout society, he looked carved from the same stone as the castle itself. His black evening coat fit him perfectly. His expression revealed nothing. Yet those who knew him well would have recognized the anger burning behind his controlled gaze. Only 2 years earlier they had been the envy of England. He had married her for love, not wealth, not influence. Love. For a time, their happiness had seemed untouchable. Then the letters began arriving. Anonymous warnings, accusations, claims of secret meetings and hidden correspondences. Each message carried another seed of doubt. Eleanor denied every charge. Alexander wanted to believe her. He truly did. But doubt is a patient poison. It requires only a tiny wound to enter the heart. Tonight, that poison had finally reached its destination. The Duke stepped forward. Conversation died instantly. Even the storm seemed to fade beneath the weight of anticipation. "Eleanor," he said quietly. The formality of her name struck harder than a slap. Her throat tightened. "Your Grace," she replied. A murmur swept through the crowd. Months ago she would have called him Alexander. The distance between those two names felt greater than any ocean. The Duke removed several folded papers from his pocket. "The evidence is undeniable." Her pulse quickened. She recognized none of the documents. "I have never seen those letters." His jaw hardened. "Yet they bear your signature. They bear a forgery." The words escaped before she could stop them. Several guests exchanged skeptical looks. A countess smirked openly. Eleanor felt humiliation creeping over her skin like ice. She turned toward her husband. "Please." Her voice softened. "Look at me." For a moment he did. She saw something flicker behind his eyes. Conflict. Memory. The remnants of a love that refused to die quietly. Hope stirred inside her. Then it vanished. "I have looked at you," he said. "For months I have looked at you and searched for honesty." Tears filled her eyes. "You once found it." The Duke closed his eyes briefly. That single movement revealed how deeply he was suffering. When he opened them again, the walls were back. Cold. Impenetrable. Final. "The matter is concluded." "No." Her voice broke. Several ladies looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. Not because they pitied her. Because despair, when genuine, is difficult to witness. "You cannot truly believe this." "I believe what is before me." "And what of everything behind us?" The question hung in the air. Their first dance. Their first kiss. Winter evenings beside the library fire. Promises whispered beneath moonlit gardens. All of it seemed present for one fragile second. Then the Duke spoke. "I can no longer separate truth from deception." The words struck her harder than any accusation. Not because he believed she had betrayed him. Because he no longer knew her. A sharp pain twisted through her abdomen. Instinctively, her hand moved to her stomach. The children shifted within her. The small movement nearly shattered her composure. She was carrying his heirs. His future. His blood. Yet she had never felt more alone. The Duke noticed the gesture. For the briefest moment, guilt crossed his face. Then society's eyes returned to him. Watching. Waiting. Judging. Demanding strength. Demanding certainty. Demanding punishment. He straightened. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the hall. "Pack your belongings and leave my castle now." A collective gasp swept through the room. Eleanor stood frozen. She had imagined anger. Arguments. Separation. Never exile. Not like this. Not before witnesses. Not while carrying his children. The chandeliers blurred through her tears. Still she refused to beg. Some wounds cut too deeply for pleading. She drew herself upright. If dignity was all she had left, she would leave with that. Very well, Your Grace. Her calmness unsettled him more than tears would have. She turned toward the staircase. No servant moved to help her. No guest offered comfort. The silence followed her all the way to her chambers. An hour later, a single carriage waited outside the castle gates. Rain poured relentlessly. A small suitcase rested beside her. Everything else remained behind. The life she had built. The dreams she had cherished. The husband she still loved. As the carriage door opened, she looked back one final time. High above, a solitary window glowed against the darkness. She knew Alexander stood there, watching, unable to stop her, unable to call her back, unable to overcome the terrible mistake forming between them. Eleanor climbed inside and placed both hands upon her stomach. The children shifted again as though sensing her sorrow. A tear slipped down her cheek. Your father has cast us away, she whispered into the darkness. But I swear I shall love you enough for all of us. The carriage disappeared into the storm. Hours later, after midnight had swallowed the countryside, a hooded servant slipped into an empty chamber deep within Blackthorn Castle. From beneath his coat, he withdrew a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. One by one he fed them into the fire. As the flames consumed the final page, a single sentence remained visible for an instant before turning to ash. The Duchess is innocent. Then the truth vanished into smoke. Winter surrendered reluctantly to spring, and spring drifted into summer before Eleanor truly understood how much her life had changed. The grand halls of Blackthorn Castle had vanished behind her like a dream fading at dawn. In their place stood a modest stone cottage on the edge of a quiet village, where rain leaked through aging shingles and every candle had to be purchased with care. Yet within those humble walls lived the 3 reasons she rose each morning. The birth had nearly taken her life. For 2 days and 2 nights, pain had swept through her like relentless waves against a cliff. No husband waited beside her bed. No family gathered at her side. Only a village midwife remained through the darkness, praying that both mother and children would survive. When the ordeal finally ended, 3 cries filled the room. 3. Not 1. Not 2. 3 tiny voices announcing their arrival to a world that had already judged them before their first breath. 2 boys and a girl. The eldest boy possessed dark hair from the beginning. The second boy arrived quieter than his brother, watching everything with solemn eyes. The little girl came last, small but determined, screaming with such force that even the exhausted midwife laughed through her tears. From that day forward, Eleanor's entire world belonged to them. The years that followed were neither easy nor kind. Money disappeared quickly. The modest savings she had carried from the castle dwindled month by month. One necklace paid for medicine. A bracelet purchased winter coal. A pair of pearl earrings became bread and milk. Every sacrifice was made without hesitation. Each item sold represented a memory of the life she had lost, yet the sight of her children sleeping safely beneath warm blankets made every loss worthwhile. Despite hardship, she refused bitterness. The children never heard her curse their father. Never heard her speak cruelly of the Duke. When they asked why other children had fathers while they did not, she simply smiled. Your father is far away. The answer never felt complete. Yet it was all she could bear to give. As the children grew, pieces of Alexander seemed to emerge in each of them. The eldest son inherited his commanding confidence. The younger boy possessed the Duke's thoughtful silence. The little girl carried the same gray eyes that once made society's most powerful nobleman nervous during negotiations. Every resemblance brought both comfort and pain. Some evenings after the children slept, Eleanor sat alone beside the window. Moonlight illuminated their faces as they dreamed. Sometimes she could almost imagine what life might have been had one terrible night unfolded differently. Meanwhile, far from the cottage, Blackthorn Castle no longer felt like a home. Alexander walked through vast corridors that echoed with emptiness. Servants bowed. Guests praised him. Society still recognized his title. Yet something essential had vanished. The silence left behind by Eleanor's absence lingered everywhere. At first he buried himself in work, estate management, political affairs, social obligations, anything to avoid confronting regret. But regret is patient. It waits. Years passed and whispers began spreading through London's aristocratic circles. The woman who had eagerly encouraged Eleanor's disgrace now sought influence within the Duke's household. Her ambition soon revealed itself. She manipulated friendships, insulted servants, spread rumors against allies. Several respected families withdrew their support from Alexander rather than tolerate her behavior. Gradually, the Duke's reputation suffered. People began questioning decisions they once accepted without hesitation. The certainty that had accompanied Eleanor's exile no longer seemed quite so certain. Doubt returned. Not the doubt that destroyed his marriage. A different kind. More dangerous. One afternoon, while reviewing estate correspondence, Alexander discovered a discrepancy in dates connected to one of the original accusations. A small detail. Almost insignificant. Yet impossible to ignore. He stared at the document for several minutes. A cold unease settled into his chest. For the first time he wondered whether he had been deceived. The possibility followed him everywhere afterward. Every memory became suspect. Every accusation demanded re-examination. Meanwhile, Eleanor quietly built a life centered upon love rather than loss. The children filled the cottage with laughter. Though money remained scarce, joy somehow survived. She created small traditions. Summer picnics beside a stream. Stories read beside candlelight. Birthday cakes baked from simple ingredients. And each child possessed a treasured keepsake. The eldest boy carried an old pocket watch. The younger boy guarded a ribbon bearing the Blackthorn crest. The little girl cherished a miniature portrait hidden inside a locket. All three items had belonged to Alexander. The children treated them like priceless treasures. One evening, as golden sunset spilled across the cottage floor, the children sat around their mother while she mended clothing. The eldest boy examined the pocket watch. Did father own this? Yes. Was he brave? Eleanor smiled softly. Very brave. The younger boy touched the ribbon. Was he kind? Her needle paused. A difficult question. One that required honesty. Sometimes kindness becomes lost when people stop trusting their hearts. The children considered this carefully. Then the little girl climbed into her lap. Will he ever come back? Silence settled over the room. Outside, swallows crossed the evening sky. Inside, Eleanor felt old wounds stirring. I do not know. The youngest boy lowered his eyes. His voice became almost a whisper. Mama, if father ever met us, would he love us? The question pierced deeper than any insult society had ever inflicted. For a moment she could not breathe. Tears threatened to appear. Yet she forced herself to smile. She kissed his forehead gently. Any father would be proud of children like you. That night, after the children fell asleep, Eleanor remained awake beside the dying fire. Miles away in Blackthorn Castle, Alexander sat alone in his study examining old records once more. Hours passed. Then something slipped from the pages of a forgotten ledger. A small burned fragment of paper. Its edges blackened by flame. Its center partially preserved. Alexander picked it up. His pulse quickened. The handwriting was familiar. Very familiar. As he stared at the surviving words illuminated by candlelight, the blood drained from his face. For the first time in years, genuine fear entered his heart. Because the fragment contained only 7 readable words. And every one of them shattered the foundations of the life he believed he understood. The Duchess never betrayed her husband. The 7 words refused to leave Alexander Blackthorn's mind. For 3 days he carried the burned fragment everywhere. It rested in his coat pocket during meetings, beside his bed at night, and upon his desk whenever he attempted to work. Each glance at the charred paper reopened a wound he had spent years pretending did not exist. The words challenged every decision he had made, every certainty he had embraced, and every sacrifice he believed necessary. The Duchess never betrayed her husband. If the statement were true, then he had destroyed the woman he loved. If it were false, then someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make him doubt himself. Neither possibility allowed peace. The castle itself seemed different now. Corridors that once felt grand appeared hollow. Portraits of ancestors stared down from the walls like silent judges. At night, the Duke wandered through rooms Eleanor had once occupied. He paused outside the library where she had spent winter evenings reading beside the fire. He stood in the rose garden she had carefully restored. He lingered in the music room where her laughter had once drifted through open windows. Memories emerged everywhere. Not memories of betrayal. Memories of kindness. The way she remembered the names of servants' children. The way she left fresh flowers in empty guest rooms. The way her eyes softened whenever she looked at him. None of it resembled the woman he had accused. The contradiction grew unbearable. At last he ordered a private investigation. No officials. No advisors. No society friends. Only truth. The search began quietly. Old records were examined. Former servants were located. Correspondence from previous years was recovered. Piece by piece, forgotten details emerged from the shadows. One maid remembered seeing letters delivered by an unfamiliar messenger. A footman recalled overhearing conversations that never matched official accounts. Another servant described receiving sudden payments shortly before resigning. Individually, the revelations seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Someone had carefully constructed a deception. Weeks later, the investigation led Alexander to a remote village nearly 2 days from London. Rain drizzled over narrow roads as his carriage approached a small stone cottage overlooking windswept fields. Inside lived a former castle servant named Margaret Finch. She was dying. Age and illness had reduced her strength, leaving only a fragile woman surrounded by fading memories. Yet when she saw the Duke enter her room, fear immediately appeared in her eyes. Not surprise, fear. Alexander noticed it instantly. He dismissed the local nurse and closed the door. For several moments, silence lingered between them. Then Margaret began to cry. The sound was quiet but heartbreaking. Years of guilt poured from her without restraint. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I prayed you would never find me." The Duke felt dread settle heavily inside him. What happened? The elderly woman stared toward the window. "I was paid." The word struck like a hammer. She confessed everything. Not because she sought forgiveness. Because death was approaching, and carrying the truth any longer had become impossible. Several influential individuals had wanted Eleanor removed from Blackthorn Castle. A powerful noblewoman desired the Duke's attention. Certain relatives wanted greater influence over the estate. Others simply enjoyed scandal. Together they had created a trap. Letters were forged. Witnesses were bribed. Servants were manipulated. Evidence was manufactured. Every accusation had been false. Every rumor had been planted deliberately. Margaret's trembling hands covered her face. "I knew she was innocent." Alexander could barely breathe. "Then why?" "Because I was weak." The answer contained no excuse, only shame. The room seemed to shrink around him. Everything he had built his judgment upon had been a lie. Every doubt, every accusation, every cruel word, a lie. The old servant reached beneath her blanket and produced a small bundle of documents tied with faded ribbon. "I kept these." Alexander accepted them with shaking hands. Inside were original drafts of forged letters, payment records, and written instructions proving the conspiracy beyond doubt. There could be no misunderstanding. No alternative explanation. Eleanor had never betrayed him. Not once. When Alexander left the cottage, rain fell harder than before. He stood beside his carriage for several minutes, unable to move. The world had shifted beneath his feet. Years earlier, he had watched his pregnant wife leave Blackthorn Castle alone. He remembered every detail now. The rain. The suitcase. The look in her eyes. At the time, he believed himself wounded. Now he understood who had truly suffered. The journey home felt endless. Each mile deepened his regret. Each memory became sharper. More painful. He recalled Eleanor asking him to look at her. He recalled her voice trembling as she defended herself. Most of all, he remembered the final expression on her face when she realized he had chosen suspicion over love. For the first time since childhood, the Duke wept. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Alone inside a dark carriage where no one could witness the collapse of a proud man's certainty. When he finally returned to Blackthorn Castle, he went directly to the attic. Few people entered that forgotten space. Dust-covered furniture draped beneath white sheets. Old trunks lined the walls. Among them stood a chest containing Eleanor's remaining belongings. The items she had left behind. Alexander opened it carefully. Inside rested books, pressed flowers, sketches, ribbons, and letters she had written during their courtship. At the very bottom lay a small portrait. He lifted it gently. The painting showed Eleanor smiling. Not the guarded smile society often saw. The genuine one. The smile she reserved for moments when she felt completely safe. His chest tightened painfully. Years had passed since he had seen that expression. And he had been the reason it vanished. That night, sleep never came. He sat beside the fireplace staring at the portrait while dawn slowly brightened the windows. Across the country, unaware of the storm unfolding within Blackthorn Castle, Eleanor prepared breakfast for 3 children who adored her. 3 children who carried the Duke's blood. 3 children he had never met. The realization haunted him. How many birthdays had he missed? How many first words? How many tears? How many dreams? The questions possessed no answers. Only regret. Days later, unable to endure uncertainty any longer, Alexander left the castle without informing anyone of his destination. The documents proving Eleanor's innocence remained locked inside his carriage. His heart carried the rest. He followed fragments of information gathered during the investigation. Village names, addresses, rumors, traces. Each clue brought him closer to the life she had built without him. Near sunset, his carriage approached a bustling market town nestled among rolling green hills. Merchants called from colorful stalls. Children laughed beside a fountain. Musicians performed cheerful melodies beneath golden light. Then Alexander noticed 3 children helping a woman arrange flowers near a market table. He could not explain why he stopped breathing, but something about them felt impossibly familiar. And before he could understand why, the little girl looked up, smiled brightly, and began running directly toward him. The little girl crossed the marketplace like a burst of sunlight. Her dark curls bounced as she ran between stalls overflowing with flowers, vegetables, and baskets of fresh bread. The late afternoon glow painted everything gold, yet Alexander Blackthorne noticed only her. Something about the child pulled at him with inexplicable force. She stopped directly before him. Not afraid. Not shy. Simply curious. Her gray eyes lifted toward his face. The same gray eyes he saw each morning whenever he looked into a mirror. For a moment neither spoke. Then she held out a small daisy. You looked lonely. Alexander stared at the flower. No one had spoken to him that way in years. The innocent kindness struck deeper than any polished compliment offered by society. Slowly he accepted the daisy. Thank you. The girl smiled. Behind her, two boys approached cautiously. One stood slightly in front of his brother, protective and confident. The second watched quietly, studying Alexander with remarkable seriousness. The resemblance hit him immediately. His heartbeat stumbled. The older boy possessed his jawline. The younger carried his mannerisms. Even their expressions felt painfully familiar. The Duke struggled to remain composed. Are these your brothers? The girl nodded proudly. We do everything together. Before he could answer, a familiar voice drifted across the marketplace. Rose. Time stopped. Alexander turned. The world around him seemed to fade into silence. Standing beside a flower stall was Eleanor. Years had passed since he had seen her. Yet the sight of her struck him with the same force as the day he first fell in love. She wore a simple blue dress instead of silk. No jewels adorned her neck. No servants attended her. Life had clearly been difficult. Yet hardship had not diminished her beauty. If anything, it had deepened it. Strength now existed where innocence once lived. Wisdom rested behind her eyes. For several heartbeats neither moved. The children looked between them in confusion. Eleanor's face lost all color. Alexander saw recognition. And something far more dangerous. Memory. The little girl smiled brightly. Mama, look. I gave the gentleman a flower. Eleanor's gaze never left Alexander. I can see that. The calmness in her voice made his chest ache. She had once trembled before him. Now she stood steady. Untouchable. The eldest boy approached her side. Mama, do you know him? 1,000 answers crowded Alexander's mind. None seemed sufficient. Eleanor finally spoke. Yes. Only one word. Yet it carried years of sorrow. The Duke stepped forward. Eleanor. She closed her eyes briefly. The sound of her name upon his lips clearly stirred old wounds. When she opened them again, caution remained. Not hatred. Not anger. Caution. The realization somehow hurt more. I should leave, she said quietly. No. The word escaped before he could stop it. The children looked startled. Alexander struggled to control the emotion rising inside him. I have searched for you. Eleanor's expression hardened. It took years. The truth landed heavily between them. He deserved it. Every syllable. The marketplace continued around them, yet Alexander barely noticed. All that mattered stood before him. The woman he had wronged. The life he had lost. The children he had never known. His gaze shifted toward the three young faces. The resemblance was impossible to ignore now. Pieces of himself stared back at him from every direction. Understanding arrived like lightning. Not gradual. Not uncertain. Absolute. These children were his. His sons. His daughter. His blood. His family. The revelation left him breathless. The little girl tilted her head. Why are you looking at us like that? Alexander could not answer immediately. Emotion clogged his throat. Years of regret, guilt, and longing collided inside him. Finally he managed to speak. Because you are extraordinary. The children grinned. Eleanor looked away. She knew exactly what realization had crossed his mind. The silence stretched. Then the younger boy stepped forward. From his pocket he produced a ribbon. A familiar ribbon. Blackthorn colors. Blackthorn crest. Alexander recognized it instantly. His hands trembled. Where did you get that? Mama gave it to me. The boy smiled. He said it belonged to my father. The word struck like thunder. Father. Alexander felt his carefully constructed composure fracture. The children noticed nothing. To them he remained merely a stranger. But Eleanor saw. She saw every crack, every regret, every ounce of grief. For the first time since their meeting, sympathy briefly appeared in her eyes. Then it vanished. Pain had taught her caution. The following weeks changed everything. Alexander returned repeatedly. At first, Eleanor resisted. She allowed brief conversations and little more. Yet the children welcomed him eagerly. He brought books. Not expensive gifts designed to impress. Books chosen carefully for curious minds. The eldest loved adventure stories. The younger preferred history. Rose adored fairy tales. Alexander learned their preferences, their fears, their dreams. Each discovery felt precious. Each moment reminded him what he had lost. One afternoon, he helped the boys repair a broken wooden cart. Another day, he spent hours teaching Rose how to ride a pony. The children gradually stopped viewing him as a visitor. They began treating him as part of their world. Eleanor noticed every change. Part of her wanted to resist. Part of her wanted to remember. The conflict exhausted her. One evening, during the village harvest celebration, music filled the square. Lanterns glowed overhead. Families laughed together. For a few precious hours, life felt lighter. Then a sudden burst of fireworks exploded above the rooftops. The younger boy startled violently. Fear flashed across his face. Without thinking, he ran through the crowd. Alexander immediately followed. The child stumbled near a carriage. Before panic could overwhelm him, strong arms lifted him safely. "It's all right." The boy buried his face against Alexander's shoulder. His small hands gripped the Duke's coat. The fear slowly faded. The crowd, the music, the fireworks all disappeared. Only the two of them remained. The child looked upward. Trust filled his eyes. Pure. Uncomplicated. The kind of trust Alexander feared he no longer deserved. Then the boy smiled. One simple word escaped his lips. "Father." The world seemed to stop. Alexander froze. The child did not realize the power of what he had said. But Eleanor did. Standing several steps away, she stared at them. Tears shimmered in her eyes. And for the first time since the night she left Blackthorn Castle, she no longer looked at Alexander as a stranger. She looked at him as a man standing on the edge of either redemption or ruin. And neither of them yet knew which future awaited. Autumn arrived draped in gold. Leaves scattered across the roads leading to Blackthorn Castle, spinning through cool afternoon winds like fragments of old memories finally set free. For the first time in many years, the castle gates stood open not for visiting nobles, political allies, or ambitious social climbers, but for something far more important: truth. The announcement had spread across England with astonishing speed. The Duke of Blackthorn was holding a public gathering. Not a celebration. Not a political event. A confession. Carriages crowded the estate from dawn until afternoon. Aristocrats filled the grand hall that had once witnessed Eleanor's humiliation. The same chandeliers glittered overhead. The same marble floor reflected candlelight. The same walls remembered every cruel whisper uttered years earlier. Yet the atmosphere felt entirely different. Anxiety had replaced arrogance. Curiosity had replaced certainty. Nobody knew exactly what Alexander intended to do. Only that something extraordinary was about to happen. At the front of the hall stood the Duke himself. He wore formal black attire, but there was no trace of pride in his expression. The confidence that had once intimidated Parliament members and noble families alike had softened into something rarer: humility. Near him stood 3 children. The eldest son held his brother's hand. Rose stood between them, clutching a small bouquet of white flowers. They looked nervous, excited, confused, yet above all they looked proud, because they stood beside the man they now openly called father. Several guests stared openly at them. The resemblance was impossible to miss. The shape of their faces, their expressions, even the way they carried themselves. Years of secrets had finally become visible. A murmur swept through the crowd as Eleanor entered the hall. Conversation instantly stopped. Every eye turned toward her. The moment carried strange symmetry. Years earlier she had crossed this room alone, condemned and abandoned. Today she entered surrounded by dignity. She wore an elegant dark blue gown provided by no noble patron and owed to no aristocratic favor. She had earned her place through survival, sacrifice, and strength. The children immediately ran toward her. Rose wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. The boys joined seconds later. The sight caused unexpected emotion among many guests, because everyone present understood something. The Duchess had raised 3 remarkable children without wealth, protection, or support, and she had done so with grace. Alexander watched her approach. For a brief moment, memories collided. The young woman he had fallen in love with. The pregnant wife he had cast out. The mother standing before him now. All were the same person. Yet she had become stronger than he ever imagined. When their eyes met, neither spoke. Words felt too small. At last Alexander stepped forward. The hall fell completely silent. "My lords and ladies." His voice echoed through the chamber. Years of authority still remained within it. But now honesty accompanied every syllable. I have summoned you here because a terrible wrong was committed within these walls. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. The Duke continued. Many years ago, I publicly accused my wife of betrayal. His gaze moved toward Eleanor. And I was wrong. Shock rippled through the audience. Several people visibly stiffened. Others lowered their eyes. Alexander produced a collection of documents. The evidence gathered during his investigation. The proof of forgery. The records of bribery. The confessions. One by one he presented everything. No detail was hidden. No embarrassment was avoided. No responsibility was shifted elsewhere. The truth unfolded before the entire aristocracy. When he finished, silence consumed the hall. The conspiracy stood exposed. The individuals responsible had already lost their influence, reputations, and social standing. Several had fled England entirely after learning the Duke possessed evidence against them. Yet Alexander's focus remained elsewhere. He turned toward the guests. The greatest fault was not theirs. The statement startled everyone. It was mine. Nobody expected those words, especially not from a duke. Alexander's gaze remained fixed upon Eleanor. I allowed pride to speak louder than love. Emotion tightened his voice. I trusted rumors more than I trusted the woman who had never given me reason to doubt her. The children listened quietly. Eleanor stood motionless. Years of pain rested between them. Years that could never be returned. Alexander took a slow breath. I watched my wife leave this castle carrying my children and convinced myself justice had been served. His eyes glistened. Instead, I committed the greatest mistake of my life. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire hall seemed frozen inside the gravity of his confession. Then Alexander did something nobody anticipated. He descended from the raised platform, walked across the marble floor, and stopped directly before Eleanor. A collective gasp swept through the room. The Duke of Blackthorn slowly lowered himself onto one knee, then both. The most powerful man in the room knelt before the woman he had once cast out. Tears immediately filled Rose's eyes. The boys stared in astonishment. Many guests looked equally shocked. Alexander lifted his gaze toward Eleanor. Years of regret lived inside his expression. Once, in this very hall, I commanded you to leave. His voice trembled. I believed I was protecting my honor. The pain behind the words was unmistakable. I now understand that my honor left with you. A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. The Duke continued. I cannot restore the years I stole. His eyes moved briefly toward the children. I cannot reclaim birthdays missed, tears unseen, or memories lost. His attention returned to her. But if forgiveness still exists within your heart, I would spend the remainder of my life proving myself worthy of it. The hall became so quiet that even breathing seemed loud. Eleanor stared down at him. For a long moment, nobody knew what she would do. Not the guest. Not the children. Not even Alexander. The silence stretched. Then she slowly stepped closer. The Duke looked up. Hope and fear battled openly across his face. Eleanor knelt before him. Not beneath him. Not above him. Beside him. The gesture alone brought fresh tears to countless eyes. Her voice was soft. Yet every person in the hall heard it. Do you know what hurt most? Alexander swallowed. No. It was never the castle. Another tear escaped. Never the poverty. She gently touched his cheek. It was believing the man I loved no longer knew me. The words struck harder than any accusation. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Pain washed through him. When he opened them again, he whispered, I know you now. The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. Eleanor studied him carefully, searching, measuring, looking beyond titles and apologies, looking into the man himself. Finally she smiled. A real smile. The same smile he had discovered years ago in moonlit gardens. The same smile preserved in the portrait hidden inside an attic chest. The smile he thought lost forever. I never stopped loving you, Alexander. The confession shattered the last barrier between them. Emotion overwhelmed him completely. He rose to his feet and gently pulled her into his arms. The hall erupted into applause. Yet neither noticed. They heard only each other. Felt only each other. Years of separation dissolved within that embrace. Then 3 small figures rushed forward. The boys arrived first. Rose followed immediately after. All 3 children wrapped themselves around their parents, laughing, crying, holding on as though afraid the moment might disappear. Alexander looked down at them. His family. His miracle. His second chance. The eldest boy grinned. We're together now. The younger boy nodded eagerly. No more leaving. Rose squeezed her father's hand. Then all 3 spoke at once. We love you, Father. Alexander broke. Not from weakness, but from happiness too large for silence. Months later, spring returned to Blackthorn Castle. Laughter echoed through gardens once haunted by regret. The children raced across sunlit lawns while Eleanor watched from beneath blooming roses. Alexander joined her, taking her hand as naturally as breathing. Together they watched their sons and daughter disappear among the flowers. For a long moment neither spoke. They simply stood together beneath the golden afternoon sky. Once, these castle doors had closed behind a broken-hearted woman. Now they stood open to a family restored by truth, redeemed by love, and strengthened by every hardship they had survived. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by sunlight and laughter, the Duke finally understood that the greatest treasure within Blackthorn Castle had never been its title, wealth, or power. It was the four souls waiting for him to come home.